Welcome to today's explainer. If you're a focused learner looking to truly understand how the law handles one of the absolute most emotionally charged situations out there, I'm talking about a battle over child custody. Well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're breaking down a really fascinating Supreme Court case from the Philippines. It's called Empuerto versus Cabrillos. And honestly, this case brilliantly demystifies Philippine child custody law. It shows us exactly what happens when private agreements between parents clash head-on with the overarching power and, frankly, the responsibility of the state to protect a vulnerable child.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. 1. The dispute over minor UNO. 2. A premature custody agreement. 3. The role of habeas corpus. 4. Why a trial is mandatory. 5. The best interest test. And finally, 6. The Supreme Court's verdict.
Section 1. The dispute over minor UNO.
So before we get completely lost in the complex legal doctrines, we absolutely have to understand the real human story at the center of this battle. And that story revolves around a young boy named Yuno. You see, Yuno's parents, Jeffrey Empuerto and Sheena Cabrillos, they separated back in 2017. Yuno went to live with his mom, but he kept up a relationship with his dad, spending holidays and summer vacations with him over in Davao City. Now, follow this timeline with me, because this is exactly where a pretty routine co-parenting situation becomes incredibly complicated. In March 2020, Jeffrey brought Yuno to Davao for a perfectly normal summer vacation. But, we all know what happened globally in March 2020. The COVID-19 lockdowns hit. Borders closed, travel just stopped entirely, and Yuno's stay was involuntarily extended. Fast forward to July 2020, restrictions are beginning to ease up, so the mother asks for Yuno back. But the father and his parents, they completely refuse. This really tense stalemate continued for months, dragging all the way until April 2021, which finally forced the mother to take legal action.
And the mother didn't just sit back and wait, right? She actually traveled directly to Davao. She actively tried to fetch her son, even bringing along local police officers and social workers to help. But according to the factual records of the case, Yuno allegedly refused to go with her. Even after local barangay mediation completely fell through and failed to produce any kind of resolution, the mother really had no choice but to escalate things to the judicial system. So she filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus before the trial court. Basically, she was seeking a formal legal order to compel the father to hand over the child.
Section 2. A premature custody agreement. Now, the trial court steps in, and at first glance, it looks like they achieved this incredibly swift, amicable resolution. This really illustrates how courts genuinely try to handle family disputes efficiently rather than dragging families through years of litigation. During the initial hearing for the writ on May 5, 2021, the presiding judge called the mother and the father into his chambers for a preliminary conference. Behind closed doors, they managed to hammer out a compromise agreement. As it was laid out in the court's subsequent order, the parents agreed to just split custody. The mother would get custody after July, the father would get the long vacations, like Christmas and summer. They even laid out specific rules for communication and returning the child's toys. The trial court took one look at this, noted that it wasn't explicitly contrary to law, morals, or public policy, and boom, immediately gave it the judicial stamp of approval. And then, the trial court did something huge. Based entirely on that private agreement, the judge declared the case completely closed and terminated. So everyone goes home happy, right? Wrong. Actually, scratch that. The trial court closing the case right here might seem like a massive win for judicial efficiency and co-parenting on the surface, but as we're going to see, the Supreme Court actually considers this to be a profound legal misstep that seriously compromised the safety of the child.
Section 3. The role of habeas corpus. To really understand exactly why the trial court got this so wrong, we have to look closely at the actual legal mechanism the mother used to kick off this entire process, habeas corpus. Let's translate the legal jargon for a second. Normally, when you hear habeas corpus, you automatically think of criminal law, right? Like getting someone released from an illegal jail cell. But in family law, it has a very specific, nuanced function. It's a speedy remedy, used to inquire into involuntary restraint, yes. But more importantly, it's the specific tool used to get a child in front of a judge to figure out who legally deserves custody. It's not merely in order to make the child physically appear in the courtroom, it is the starting gun for a rigorous legal process. And the legal rules lay out a very strict sequence to ensure this is handled correctly. Let's trace it procedurally under Section 13. Step 1, the petition is filed. Step 2, the writ is issued, legally compelling the child to be physically produced in court. Step 3, the person holding the child is mandated to file an official answer to explain their side of the story. Step 4, the court can issue a provisional or temporary custody order. And finally, Step 5, the court holds a full evidentiary trial to make a final decision based on cold, hard facts. Now, in our case, the trial court stopped right at Step 2. They completely skipped allowing the father to file his official answer and completely bypassed that full trial entirely. Section 4. Why a trial is mandatory. So why is skipping those procedural steps such a critical error in the eyes of the Supreme Court? Well, here is the absolute core of the court's philosophy on family law. The trial court genuinely believed that if two parents come to a mutual agreement about their child, boom, the conflict is resolved and the case can be neatly closed. But the Supreme Court holds a completely different view. They say a child is not a piece of property that parents can just privately divide up like a shared bank account. An agreement between parents is entirely insufficient on its own. The state has an active, non-negotiable duty to step in and independently verify that this arrangement actually makes sense and that both parents are genuinely fit to raise the child. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the specific language the Supreme Court cites from established jurisprudence. The text here shows that a child's rights are not and absolutely should not be dependent solely on the wishes, much less the whims and caprices of their parents. The court is explicitly stating that compromise agreements on child custody are seriously frowned upon. A trial is absolutely mandatory because a judge requires hard, cross-examined evidence to evaluate if these parents can actually provide a safe environment. Private handshakes behind closed doors simply do not meet that legal standard. No way!
Section 5. The best interest test.
This brings us to the ultimate doctrine that governs every single custody decision in the Philippines: the best interest of the child. When a judge holds that mandatory trial we just talked about, what exactly are they legally required to look for? Well, the law gives them a strict checklist under Section 14 of the Rule on Custody of Minors. A judge must actively investigate factors like the child's material and moral welfare, their physical health and safety, and the emotional and educational environment they're being subjected to. Crucially, they absolutely must look for any history of child abuse. And if the child is over 7 years old, their personal preference must be considered. This is a massive point here, because in this specific case, the father actually alleged during the preliminary proceedings that the mother had previously exposed the child to violence. So the crucial point to take away here is that a judge cannot simply ignore these factors for the sake of judicial speed. In the Philippines, there's a general legal rule that illegitimate children automatically fall under the parental authority of the mother. But the Supreme Court emphasizes that relying purely on that default rule without actually holding a full trial to evaluate those Section 14 welfare factors, especially when physical abuse is actively being alleged by the other parent, is a grave jurisdictional error. By accepting the compromise and closing the case without a trial, the judge essentially abandoned their fundamental duty to protect the child.
Section 6. The Supreme Court's verdict.
Let's bring this narrative to its resolution with the Supreme Court's final authoritative orders. The court made their legal stance incredibly clear, stating emphatically, best interest demands that a proper trial be conducted to determine who should have the rightful custody over a child. They prioritized a thorough, evidence-based evaluation of UNO's true welfare over a speedy, untested, behind-closed-doors agreement. The message to the lower courts is unmistakable. Convenience, efficiency, and a clear docket never, ever trump the safety and well-being of a minor. Because of this profound procedural failure, the Supreme Court reversed and set aside the lower court's decisions. They remanded the case, meaning they sent it all the way back down to the exact trial court of origin to be done properly. They ordered the judge to conduct a proper, full-blown trial to formally evaluate the evidence and determine rightful custody based solely on the child's best interests. And importantly, in the meantime, while that lengthy trial actually happens, the court ordered that temporary custody, known legally as custody pende lite, remains exactly where UNO currently is, with his actual custodians, the father and his grandparents. We've seen how a surprisingly common situation, just an extended summer vacation, turned into a complex legal battle, revealing the incredibly deep protections the law places around minors. The courts aren't just impartial referees for arguing parents. They are mandated to be the active protectors of the vulnerable. So I leave you with this to think about. When parents fight and strike private deals behind closed doors, who ensures the child's true voice is heard? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.